I've been replaying Fire Emblem 7 recently, and you know what that means? It's time for me to get yelled at by other people on the internet who don't like that I play a video game slightly differently than they do. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of Fire Emblem as a franchise, as well as my coverage of turn-based strategy, tactics, RPGs in general, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, I've been replaying Fire Emblem 7 recently. It's been a little while, probably, honestly, the longest span of time that I've ever had since I replayed FE7. I used to replay it like every year, but I've just been too busy for that recently. But I saw that it was on NSO recently. NSO is something that I have on our Switch too, and I was like, you know what? This is a good game to have on hand while I'm editing or working on other projects or whatever, and because of my ADHD-ass brain, I need something else that I can distract myself with while I'm trying to get things done, if I'm going to get things done. So, I picked it back up. I have to replay through from the very beginning to be able to unlock all the difficulty modes and everything, and it gave me the opportunity to kind of reevaluate how I feel about a lot of the characters. So, I figured, what better opportunity than now to go through and do a tier list for Blazing Blade, Blazing Sword, however you want to translate it. I went through and I organized all these characters by their recruitment time, which is basically, you know, how I've been re-experiencing the game. Some tier lists go alphabetically. That's insane, because that means that you start with Athos, and it changes the whole perspective of the thing. So, we're going to go through, we're going to rank everything on a normal S through D basis, because really, of all the Fire Emblem games, 7 is probably the one that's best suited to taking a very baseline approach, shall we say, in terms of how you analyze the characters. A lot of what Fire Emblem does to this day is influenced by the archetypes that became very popularized by Blazing Sword. Yes, obviously those archetypes originated in other eras of the game, including, you know, going all the way back to Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Yes, I know that, but 7 set a lot of standards, so I think it's a pretty good one to go with a standard tier list for. That means we're going to be starting with Lyn, and we're going to go ahead and kick right off here by talking about what exactly it is that she brings to the table. And frankly, it's pretty good. The biggest thing with Lyn is she has very low con, and that's not too surprising, all things considered, given the fact that even though she's a lord, she's very much the Myrmidon archetype, right? All 3 lords in FE7 have very particular styles to their stat growths, their bases, their weapon choices, etc. Lyn is a Myrmidon. Eliwood is like your standard lord, kind of like a mercenary sword fighter type deal, who then promotes the cavalry to switch it up a little bit. And then Hector is much more of like an armor knight, but he has axes instead of lances. That became the standard weapon of armor knights, or just knights, translation notwithstanding, for the GBA games. So, as far as Lyn is concerned, it's not too weird that she has low con. The big issue is that her main weapon that she gets for the end game, the Soul Katai, is extremely heavy. And that means that for what should be her ultimate pinnacle upgrade, she's not very good with it. That said, through the majority of the game, she can be very, very strong. She's always very strength dependent, as you would expect from most Myrmidon archetypes, but she's dodgy, she's fast, she's got good dexterity, she can crit. The Mani Katai allows her to have all of the anti-armor and cavalry stuff that you would expect from a lord. It has a good crit rate on its own. So I think Lyn is actually a pretty strong character. I'm not going to say that she's A or S tier necessarily. She's infantry locked, she's stuck with swords until she promotes, and then she gets bows, which are not particularly phenomenal in Blazing Blade to begin with. So, but I think she is a very solid B tier character. I don't know that she'll necessarily be the top of B tier, but she does her role very well. And I never really feel bad having her on the field, even if she's not as universally versatile as some other characters are. Now we have Sane, and Sane and Kent, obviously together, are our 2 cavaliers for the starting part of the game, the 2 starting recruits, because they're not always cavaliers anymore. Your green and your red knights, however you want to like kind of think about it or perceive it. Sane is the strong but kind of slower and less dexterous one, and as a result, because Blazing Blade is a fairly easy game, he is very, very strong. Obviously, there's particular aspects to Hector Hard Mode, but realistically, Hector Hard Mode should probably have a tier list all its own that I'll do one day, so we're not going to really square things too much by that one mode, looking at a more general view of how the character functions here. And I think Sane is quite strong. I don't think he's necessarily A tier. Some people might wind up disagreeing with me here, but I have to go by my own experience, right? I'm not a super perfect math crunching numbers kind of guy. I know maybe it's a weird perspective as someone who is primarily a tactics and strategy guy, but there's a little bit to be said for that subjective experience with the character, and Sane, while good, has never been quite as high performing for me as, like, Kent has, which should give you a spoiler as to where Kent is going to go in a moment. That said, Sane is a Cavalier. He's got move range, he's got inbuilt Canto, he's got the ability to use swords and lances and then promotes to use axes. He's got good all-around stats. You really never feel bad to use him outside of very particular stat screwage, such as particularly low dex, which is not something that's going to happen all too often. So I think A is a very strong spot for Sane, and I'm very happy to have him there. Of course, leading on from there, that means that Kent is going in S tier. Of these two, and they're probably largely interchangeable, Kent has been the one that has performed the best for me. He's got better speed, he's got better dexterity, he doesn't always have the best strength, but because of his speed and the fact that by the time you promote to Paladin, you can use all three weapon types, means you have the versatility to be able to approach whatever particular battle situation you need to compensate for different stats. And he is the most well-rounded to be able to best utilize that sort of skill set, if you want to think of it that way. All the same reasons otherwise that Sane has still apply to Kent. Canto, being mounted, all that type of good stuff. Very strong all-rounder. They can also support together or with Lyn or other characters. Just makes them good overall. You're always happy to have them on the board. He's just a phenomenal character, really, when it comes down to it. Next up, we have Florina, and Florina is definitely one of those characters, kind of the classic Pegasus Knight in a way, where you never really feel confident, I guess, in her performance. Can she be really, really strong? Absolutely. But it very strongly depends on her growths and what stats you get with her as you go through any given campaign, story, whatever. She's an archetypical Pegasus Knight. She's very frail. She's weak to arrows. She's got good magic defense, which is always nice. She's very fast. She can wield lances okay. I've kind of found her to be a little bit better with swords, typically due to the lower constitution requirements, but it really depends on what her strength winds up shaking out like. I definitely prefer a different Pegasus Knight to her. Unfortunately, you only get that Pegasus Knight on a certain route, so it's kind of apples to oranges in a way. I would say that Florina is probably the second best of the three Pegasus Knights in the game, and as such, I'm going to say that she is solidly B tier. Is this going to be a Marcia situation where everyone needs to tell me that I'm completely screwing up and that Florina is the best character in the game, much like Marcia, and I just don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm a tourist and everything else? Entirely possible. However, that's just not correct, and you are wrong if you try to tell me that that is the case. So I think Florina is quite good. I'd say she's actually better than Lyn, so we'll, there we go, move her in front of Lyn here. You know, being a mounted flying character just gives you a lot of bonuses as it is, but she's not as consistently reliable as other characters. Next we get Will, and Will, oh boy. Will is one of those characters who has the benefits of being a specialist because he is an archer. So there's certain scenarios that he's better at approaching than most other characters in the game. When you need to be able to attack over walls consistently, have good accuracy, have okay strength, be able to counterattack at range. Some characters just can't do that flat out, or they can't do it without a very specific weapon, which they may or may not have the weapon skill for, or the weapon uses available for. So he does have a niche there. But of your bow users, Will has always consistently been my lowest performing unit. Does that mean that I have not had him be extremely successful in the past? No. I've also played the Blazing Blade dozens of times. Like, I've used every character here and had them be successful at least once. Does that mean that they're good in general? No, it does not. That said, I do like archers more than many people do. Maybe call that bias since I am a certified archery instructor in real life. But I don't think Will is necessarily a D tier character. A lot of people would put him there, but I think he's solidly in C. It might be low C due to the limitations of being an archer and Will's stat spread not being the best for it anyway. But I do like that he's able to perform if you choose to use him. He just has a niche, and that's not always the best thing. Next up, we have Dorcas. And while Dorcas would be really fun to put in D because D is for Dorcas, or, you know, as the classic jokes go, having an M tier for Mutton because Dorcas and his Mutton are a meme in the Fire Emblem community, even though it's kind of annoying. Dorcas is not, in my opinion, a particularly great axe fighter. Axe fighters have had a lot of issues over the years as it is in Fire Emblem. But of the two that you get, I have largely had much more success with Barter, or Bartree, or however you want to pronounce it, I don't care, compared to Dorcas. I like Dorcas's design more, and I do like his characterization. And he's not unusable. I would like him more than Will. So I think he can... Come on, tier maker. There we go. Fine. I like him more than Will, but I don't think he's better than a C-tier character. You know, he's got issues with accuracy, he's got issues with speed, like any axe fighter will. And realistically, Barter's probably not going to be outside C either, but I think Barter's probably going to go above Dorcas because I've had better results with him, and he just tends to be a little bit more reliable and accurate overall, which is very important when you're using axes. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to break our current order here a little bit because Barter and Dorcas are very similar, so we may as well just put Barter in, or Bartree, or again, whatever, while we're talking about it. He has all the benefits of being an axe fighter: good strength, dealing high damage, being generally durable, although very weak to certain scenarios. Anything that is like outstandingly faster than him is going to be devastatingly powerful because of their low defenses. Anything that's magical is just going to be bad overall, or anything that is dodgy is also going to be a problem in a lot of scenarios. But to me, Barter has always been a little bit more accurate, a little bit more capable, and a little bit more reliable as a result. So they're both C tier, but he's going to go above Dorcas in that particular tier. Now, Sarah. Sarah, I think, is a very solidly A-tier character just due to the utility of her class. As a healer, she's just good. Like, you're not looking at her for combat stats, but then even once you do promote her to Bishop, if you do, she is able to perform in that role as well. She's not going to be your strongest caster by any means, but by starting off with staves and being your primary staff user for a very long time, she is just naturally going to be better than a lot of other characters because she's going to enable your best characters to continue fighting for longer. It's a long-standing trope with staff users that we've only really been starting to get away from with more recent Fire Emblem titles. For a classic one like this, she's just naturally going to be very strong. Urk is also an interesting one. The Urk/Pent debate is one that I've seen raging for over 20 years now, as long as I've been part of the Fire Emblem community on the internet writ large. Urk is definitely a very sink or swim type character. I definitely like him. I've had a great performance from him, and if you are able to get him well leveled and get some good stats for him, he will largely, in my experience, outperform Pent by the end of the game. However, that consistency tends to be a little bit more of an issue compared to a character like Pent, who's just good from the jump and will largely perform well enough for you to fulfill his role, which is really all that you need. That said, I do think Urk is quite strong and I think is a B tier character. Having the ability to use anima magic, having the ability to do some incidental healing once he promotes to Sage, and generally doing good damage and having good speed, relatively speaking, makes him a very solid character. If you're looking for someone to slot into your team in a game where having magic damage is relatively uncommon, all things considered, he's a very good spot filler and will perform for you quite well. Warranted if he gets the right growths, which, you know, not every character is like that in Fire Emblem or in FE7, but he is definitely one of them. Next up, we have Wrath, and Wrath is another character that I've had be very sink or swim for me. Generally, he's been pretty good, but he does suffer from being locked to bows during his initial promotion. That said, he is mounted, he gets swords once he does promote, and overall, he's fast enough and strong enough to perform as a glass cannon damage dealer throughout the entirety of the game. The problem is, unlike other cavalry characters like Sane and Kent and other characters that we're going to talk about, he doesn't really have the durability to stand on the front line forever. Bows should be his primary form of attack, swords is a little bit of a backup option, and as such, he doesn't have the versatility and the utility that some other characters who are higher tier should have. As such, I think he's going to be a B tier character, not quite above Lyn, but above Urk, thanks in part to the fact that he does have a horse, and he is quite good at what he does. You just have to baby him slightly due to his re-recruitment time after the Lyn campaign. He's not bad at all, though, and I do like him quite a bit. Having a horse is very strong in many Fire Emblem games. Being able to have a sword and a bow kind of just makes him a better Lyn in a certain way, though he doesn't get the crit rate. He's not bad. B tier, I think, is a solid place for him. Matthew. Oh, poor Matthew. I really like Matthew as a character. I think he's got a good story. I like that he's kind of like a classic retainer to Hector, while also being a thief and having a lot of utility in that regard. However, of our thief archetype characters in the game, I think he's definitely the worst. Matthew, I'm going to say, is probably bottom of C tier, because the only thing that he really has going for him is his utility as a thief. Being a character that can use lockpicks, being someone who is very dodgy and as such can kind of skirmish with axe fighters in the early game gives him some playability, but he does not scale well at all. You do not want to make Matthew your assassin if you're not using Jafar, and realistically, if you're comparing Jafar and Matthew, Jafar's generally going to be the better option in most scenarios. His strength is abysmal, he doesn't dodge quite as often as you would like, especially on higher difficulties, and when you have other characters like Legault who are just across the board stronger than he is, not just in the strength category, but just in stats in general, he just falls by the wayside more often than not. I truly think that if we were able to recruit his lady, Layla, and she doesn't get killed off unceremoniously by the Black Fang because, ouch, she probably would be better than he is, but as it stands, we get Matthew, and even though he's fun, we're grading stuff based on combat performance and gameplay performance here, and he's not the best. Now, Nils and Ninian, I know they come at different recruitment times, they technically have very slight differences between them, but at the end of the day, they're dancers, and they also have special rings that allow them to give extra buffs to your characters if you need them to do something more than dancing. Automatically, right off the bat, that makes them S tier characters. Are they my favorite characters to use? No, not particularly. I've always found most dancer archetype characters in Fire Emblem to be rather boring. Stuff like Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, where you have the herons, where you can kind of play around their ability to actually dance more than one character at a time, depending on certain circumstances, which game you're playing. That makes them far more interesting. But just deploying a character that says, I give this other person an extra turn, it's strong, but it's not exciting in a lot of ways. Nils and Ninian, though, having the ability to give out extra buffs in an otherwise very straightforward game where you don't have a lot of RPG mechanics like buff providing and things, makes them extremely interesting. I don't know that they're going to sit at the top of S tier for the entirety of this actual tier list, but they are incredibly strong, no matter which one of you're using, given what part of the game that you're currently in. They are always going to be very strong. They're always going to be a very good deploy option, and it's always exciting when you get a new ring or whatever for them, or a bracelet that allows them to do extra stuff. They're very, very nice. It never feels bad to use them. They're always a strong option for boots or other things that allow them to move farther. They're definitely S tier. Now, Lucius. Lucius, I think, probably an A-tier character behind Sane. It's hard to be a magic character who's frail, doesn't have a horse, anything like that in a game like FE7. But at the same time, Lucius has very strong stats, and light magic can be very nice for dealing with shamans or just generally being a little bit faster than your anima magic users. Kind of a Myrmidon-esque version of a magic class. And Lucius is by far one of the archetypical light magic users for the entirety of the Fire Emblem franchise. Is he like on the level of Lind with Aura? Yeah, maybe not quite as much, but as a stat stick, as a caster character that other characters have tried to emulate, I think we can very easily go back to him as an example of what to do right. I'm always happy to use him. I'm always happy to get staves with him when he promotes, just like Urk going into Sage. But light magic just has a certain little extra oomph to it that feels very nice, and I think he is generally better than Urk is. Now, Wallace. Oh, poor Wallace. I love Wallace. I think he's awesome. I love his personality. I love his shaved bald head for reasons that are definitely not particularly relevant to my own personality or appearance. I do like the fact that he has like this sort of like silver armor with gold trim, and he's kind of like a Jagan, but not really. The main issue with him is he can be extremely strong if you have very strong meta knowledge of the game and are not opposed to grinding. If you're playing on hard mode, when you recruit him, you don't have to use his Night Seal on him at level 10, and as such, from the point that you recruit him in Lind's campaign on, you can actually spend your time grinding him up to level 20 before you use that Night Seal on him to make him extremely powerful. Does that make him better than Oswin the God, who is just ridiculously overstated for his role and for the time that you recruit him? Not necessarily, and you need to go through very specific actions to even make him comparable. That said, I do think he's better if you're playing on hard mode than people give him credit for. I know a lot of people are into LTC runs and being super optimal with things. That's fine. If you enjoy that, that's totally your prerogative, and I'm glad that you do. I personally could not give less of a shit about that type of playthrough or run, though, and more seeing what I can get out of these characters in the sandbox that they're provided in. And Wallace does a pretty good job with that overall. I certainly would take him over like a Will or a Matthew because he just has that potential within him. However, at baseline and in your normal use case, I don't think he's going to be more useful or better than even like a Barter or a Dorcas. Even as a pre-promote, there's better options. So I'll put him in C tier. I know a lot of people put him in D tier. It's my final offer. It's the most negotiation I'm going to do. We're moving on. Eliwood. Oh boy, the discussions I've seen about Eliwood over the years are interesting. I've had a lot of different mixed results with Eliwood. The stat screwage I've gotten with Eliwood are like notably bad over the course of my time playing this game, but at baseline, he's not a terrible character. I think he has more potential than Lyn. He has the same issue that Lyn has, where his own special super weapon that he gets by the end game far exceeds his ability to wield, and that's not something you're really going to be able to fix. But being a sword fighter-esque character who's going to have the opportunity to fight a bunch of axe-wielding enemies and get weapon triangle advantage as a result, until you get far enough into the game where he can promote and then gain a horse, then get lances and have much more utility, he's not terrible. But on the flip side, I have gotten so strength screwed with Eliwood over the years. I really can't put him any higher than low B tier. Just getting a horse is strong. Having swords and lances is strong. Getting access to Durandal and just being able to be a huge damage dealer through a small portion of the game is strong. But man, he is a real casino cannon when it comes to how successful he's actually going to be for you over the course of a campaign. So I think Eliwood is going to sit solidly in B tier. I don't really see that moving. Maybe he won't be bottom of B tier. We'll see. We're going to pick up the pace here a little bit because we do have a lot of characters to get through, and we've gotten through a lot of the discussion-heavy characters at this point. Moving on to Marcus. Marcus is very solidly bottom of S tier. he's a Jagan, and he's better than his own version in FE6. I've done pre-promote runs on Hector hard mode of FE7. Marcus has always been a rock for me in those playthroughs. Even though, yes, he has the poor stat growths that Jagans have, he still performs extremely well. He's got good bases for what his role is. He's got good weapon levels for what his role is. He's got a good class for what his role is. You are never in the wrong for running Marcus, and by default, that means that he is at least bottom of S tier. Lowen, for me, has also been an A-tier character. He's probably the worst of the Cavaliers, so I think we can very solidly leave him at the bottom of A-tier. He definitely wants to be in a class where he's not stuck as Cavalier, something a little bit more defensive, like Knight, General, or some other class that would like the defensive growths that he has, would be very beneficial for him. He has a hard time doubling, but he is very durable. So if you want a frontline character that has flexibility in the weapon triangle while also generally being kind of difficult to take down, magic users notwithstanding, he is a very good option for that role. He's just not going to be quite as versatile as Sane and Kent are, so he's going to be lower of A tier. Rebecca is a character that I think is better than Will, but not by much. We're going to put her above Wallace, largely because while she has better growths in my experience and has a better overall endgame than Will does, she's still bow locked, she's still infantry locked, and her strength growth in particular and her strength bases in particular are not super great. She does have fire as a support element, if I remember correctly. I believe that's right. So she can get a nice attack boost through that. But if you want to make serious use of Rebecca, you have to lean into that to make sure that she's actually able to deal enough damage to perform her role, which, as an archer and eventually a sniper, all she's meant to do is deal damage. So if you have low strength to begin with, and before you even get into higher difficulty modes, that's just not going to cut the mustard for you. Now, though, of course, we need to talk about Hector, the absolute GOAT, the archetype that Ike was built upon. He's an absolute unit. He is easily S tier, above Kent, above Marcus. Dude is just an absolute unit. I mean, the amount of reliability that he brings to the table, a little bit of accuracy issues in the early game, I'll admit, thanks to his reliance on axes, but with the Wolfbeal, just with great stats overall, he is a character that you will be able to rely on to hold the line when many others just won't, without being like an XP sponge like Marcus is. He's an absolutely phenomenal character. He's got all of the anti-armor and anti-cavalry that all the other lords have, while having the durability that they do not. He's also generally decently fast and gets swords on promotion. He gets armads. He can use his particular special legendary weapon without any issues with his con. He's just a phenomenal character overall. He is always one that you want on your team, regardless of what route and difficulty you're playing on. Oswin is another extremely strong character. He is stuck as General, and it might be a little hypocritical to dock him for that when Hector's in basically the same spot. However, due to the fact that he doesn't get special legendary weapons unto his own right, I'm going to say he's not quite as good. He's just below Sane. If that makes you think that Oswin is bad in any way, no, he is not. Oswin is another character that you are more than happy to have available to you. He's just incredibly strong from the moment you recruit him to the end of the game. In a way, he's kind of like the archetype for Louis in Fire Emblem Engage, who's equally as strong. He's just a phenomenal character, a very strong retainer, and someone that you're happy to have on your team. Then we get Guy, and Guy, I'm going to say, is just slightly above Lyn as another classic Myrmidon-esque character. Is he as good as, like, a Rutger? No way. However, he's not bad either. It's not great to be sword and infantry locked in FE7 in general, but at the end of the day, he's still strong, he's still fast, he still gets the innate crit bonus of being a sword master, even if it's not as strong as it was in FE6. He's all around a solid character. There's not really a lot to say about him. He's pretty basic overall, but he has advantages that Lyn doesn't, largely his strength and his con, that make him, I think, a little bit better than her overall. He's a very solid character. Marilinus. Marilinus is going to go in D tier because he's just kind of like a weird failed character archetype. You know, Fire Emblem did this thing for a couple of games where they're like, your convoy is something that's on the field. And while from like a military strategy standpoint, I like that, and I think it's really cool that they did that. It's not something that makes for a good character, especially when he spends the majority of the game as a tent that you have to protect if you want to be able to access your convoy. He doesn't have any means to defend himself. He can't even move for 2/3 of the game. He just kind of sucks. The fact that we even have to talk about him as a character at all is kind of weird. The way he functioned in FE6 was more reasonable, even if you had to dedicate a deployment slot to him. It's a weird system. There's a reason that it didn't really return in future Fire Emblem games. He just kind of sucks. Priscilla. Priscilla is also going to be an A-tier character right above Sarah, and her main reason for being above Sarah is the fact that she just automatically comes on a horse. You want your healers to be able to keep up with the other characters. She's not quite as swift in terms of movement range as like your Cavaliers or your Pegasus Knights, but just being able to move faster to get through terrain a little bit better, just through sheer movement points, and keep moving forward with the rest of your army, it means that she's just automatically going to be better than Sarah in pretty much every way. When she promotes, she does keep her horse, of course. She gets anima magic. She does everything that Sarah wants to do, essentially, but just is a little bit better. She comes at a low level, so it's going to take a while to get her to that point, but even if you never actually promote her and you just keep her in her base class and use her as a staff bot for the entire game, you're still happy to have her in that role, so she's very strong. Raven is going to be a top-ish tier character. He's not quite going to reach S, I don't think. But I'm inclined to say that he's better than Sane, there we go, in most scenarios. He just has such strong stats. He's able to promote to hero, so he can get swords, and he can get axes, and he can use them both equally well. He can tussle with pretty much any enemy in the game, even has a little bit of resistance, enough to survive mages and the like. He is your archetypical strong mercenary character. Think Garrick from FE8 as an example. Like, exact same type of archetype. He's just a strong character overall. Canis. Canis is weird. I think overall I'm inclined to put Canis just slightly above Urk, because Canis is a little bit more consistent in my experience. He has a similar-ish stat spread to Urk. He'll be fast enough to double most enemies that he wants to be able to double. He's generally accurate. Dark magic is heavy and inaccurate in comparison to like anima magic, but he's good with it, so that counteracts that sort of disability, and he is able to deal overall more damage as a result, because dark magic is like the axe of magic, right? He's quite a competent character. He's still able to promote into using staves. There isn't too much to talk about with him other than the fact that he's likely maybe some sort of, not descendant, like close relation-ish to Nime in FE6, which is always fun because she's a fun character. He's just solid overall dark magic caster. Nothing too remarkable to speak about, but pretty good at using Luna, all things considered. Dart. Dart is our only pirate in the game, and he is a far sight better than Barter or Dorcas. I would say Dart is probably bottom of D tier. He still struggles as an axe user in FE7. It's not as bad as it was in FE6, but you do have to baby him a bit if you really want to get him online. That said, if you give him any amount of investment whatsoever, he'll become very strong very quickly, especially once you promote him into a berserker and he gets that innate crit rate that sword masters get. From then on, he will just start slaying out. He's not your most durable character, but he's tough enough to survive on the front line. Sometimes you'll run into scenarios where he'll accidentally crit himself to death because he keeps clearing spaces for more enemies to come in and hit him. But that's kind of the nature of the beast when you're using a big axe-wielding character like this in an early Fire Emblem game. He's quite strong overall. He's no Ross, but he set the stage, and that makes me like him. Now, and I had to actually check her name because I can never remember her name for some reason. We have Fiora, the worst of the Pegasus Knights. She's not a bad character overall, but I've never really been happy to use her, and I've generally always had pretty poor performance from her. I'd say she's better than Eliwood and Dart and can solidly go into B tier just by being like a flying cavalry character, and she's not terrible. But compared to Florina and later Farina, she just doesn't quite cut the mustard. She doesn't have the best of strength, really even the best of speed compared to other Pegasus Knights. She's all around a very middle-of-the-road character, and unless you're going all in on the Pegasus Knights so you can try to regularly make use of triangle attack, she's just not going to do that much for you in a role where she's got a lot of other competition. Moving on to Legault. I really like Legault, actually. Like, if we want to talk about Myrmidon-esque characters, I think he's right up here. I've often had better experiences with him than I have with Lyn, if I can get him, there we go, to go where I want him to go. Legault is a very nice character. As an original member of the Black Fang, he obviously has a lot of skill behind his actions, and while just having the utility of being a good thief character overall, compared to Matthew, who has pretty mediocre stats, makes him very nice just at baseline, he also scales pretty damn well. Every time I've ever really leaned into Legault and made him an assassin, made him quite powerful, he has been an absolute slaying machine for me, and he's got both the durability and the evasiveness to largely survive enemy phases without too much stress or danger. I think he's a very strong character, especially when you bring his utility into mind, and while he is always going to be sword locked, because again, he's a thief into an assassin, it's not the end of the world for him. Next up, we have Isadora, and Isadora is very easily C tier, probably above Wallace, Will, and Matthew. She has a lot going for her by virtue of just being a paladin at baseline. However, even in my pre-promote only runs, she's always been disappointing. I love her design, I love her character, but at the end of the day, as a paladin, she just doesn't have the stats that she needs to really reliably hold the line. Like, her HP in particular is abysmal for the role that she's supposed to have. She's not really able to wield axes very well. She doesn't have particularly good growths. She's just kind of worse Marcus overall, and by the time you get her in the campaign, unless for some reason, again, you're going for a very specific build, or you're doing like an Iron Man run where you've had just endless amounts of characters get slaughtered, you don't have too much of a reason to use her beyond maybe Paladin, Canto, Cavalry, utility shenanigans. Heath, on the other hand, is a pretty solid character. He joins a little late for what his level and his stat spread is, but he is a Wyvern Knight, which makes him pretty strong right off the bat. I'd say he's lower rank than your Fioras and your Ellywoods, you know, considering Ellywood gets mounted as a promotion. He's not the best Wyvern Knight by a long shot in the franchise, but if you decide to use him and you have the room in your army to put a little bit of babying into a character, he can get quite strong. He's never a character who I'm super excited to finally get a hold of and start making use of, but the times that I have used him, he's been viable enough. Then we get Hawkeye, and Hawkeye is kind of a weird character, man. Like, he's a berserker, but he's got his own unique sprite and animations. He's pretty good overall. Like, will Dart be better than him if you level the two of them? Yeah. But Hawkeye's weirdly strong, dude. Like, he's one of those pre-promotes where you get him and you're just like, yeah, I could use this guy through the whole campaign, and I'll be perfectly happy about it. He won't wind up as strong as some of my other properly curated characters who I've had from essentially the start of the game once I finally get to the Fire Dragon, but like, bro cuts the mustard for 95% of the game. So I think I have to put him very solidly in the bottom of B tier. I've really never been unhappy to use him. He could use a little bit of extra oomph, a little extra spice in certain stat areas. His speed in particular can get a little, yeah, but overall, he does his job pretty damn well, and I like that archetype of character. Geets is another character just like that. I found him to be a little less capable than Hawkeye. Oh, okay, tier list, thank you. But he fills a very similar role, it's just this time he's a warrior instead of a berserker. And having that utility to be able to use bows, in particular as like a longbow bot, makes him very nice, actually. I've had a lot of success just tossing him a longbow when I recruit him and letting him snipe stuff and weaken stuff from a distance, which is pretty solid overall. He's not the best warrior in the series. He's certainly not the best axe fighter in the game. However, he is consistent and has a nice utility that you get right off the cuff when you recruit him, compared to other characters like Barter and Dorcas, who you might have to go through a whole lot of rigmarole, shall we say, to get to an equivalent point. Just his starting rank of bows in general gives him that nice piece of utility that just does not come with any other character that has a similar role in the game. Then we get Farina, and in the times that you're able to use Farina, I think she's a very solidly bottom of A tier character. Farina's stats are just better than her sisters, assuming that you give her the optimal recruitment conditions, which, like, if you're using her, you should. If you're not going to use her, then yeah, like, don't, obviously. But if you actually intend to use her and recruit her properly, she is extremely strong and will pretty much outperform Florina in any time that you use the both of them or you compare their stats. She's just a devastatingly powerful Pegasus Knight. She does have her weaknesses, as they always do, especially in these early GBA games, but overall, I think she's quite good. As a matter of fact, I would actually even put her above Lowen, because whenever I do get her, she often replaces him as a similar role in my army. She's not as durable, but she's got just as good move range, technically better because she's flying, while also still being devastatingly strong in melee combat. So I like her a lot. She's very good. Pent, I think, goes very solidly above Lucius, thank you, in A tier, maybe even above Oswin. Pent is just so good because he's such a strong all-rounder character. Like, he's got magic for offense, he's got staves for healing, he's got good move range, he's got good stats, he's got perfectly solid and reasonable growths. You're just not unhappy to have him on your team. Like, Pent can slot into basically any team, especially if you're not perfectly min-maxing things. He's just strong, he's just capable. He's kind of like a generically competent sorcerer type character. And in a cast where you do have to put a lot of resources into making many of these characters viable, that's very nice to have. Now, unfortunately, his wife Louise is much, much worse. I'd say she's probably bottom of B tier, honestly. She doesn't have terrible stats, and it is nice that she comes with a good weapon level, so if you are craving a strong archer character and you haven't been raising one up to this point, you can do worse with her, especially if you let her have her support with Pent based on your positioning and stuff. Like, she can fulfill that role for you, largely. However, if you have any other bow-wielding character who you've leveled to an equivalent point, especially if you have a relevant support for them, by that point, they're going to blow Louise out of the water. Characters like Will and Rebecca, I think, still rank a little bit lower because it can take them so long to get to that point, whereas Louise just comes in at kind of like average but competent. So that puts her higher overall for usability, but she is certainly not the best. And you could probably make an argument that she doesn't even deserve to be in B tier, but we'll give it to her compared to her C tier archer compatriots. Now we get Carol, and Carol, unlike his performance and his appearance in FE6, just really does not hold up super well here, especially compared to his equivalent recruit Harkin, who we'll talk about in a second. Carol is just kind of a C tier character, probably top of C tier. He's not unusable. He's a solid Myrmidon Swordmaster archetype. He's definitely not going to outperform Guy or Lyn if you've been leveling them properly. But at the same time, he can still do better than a lot of these other characters that you're going to get, whether they be pre-promotes or characters that you're going to be trying to get leveled up. He's got the strength, he's got the speed, he can slay out for you in certain scenarios, but he is delicate and definitely doesn't have the same killing potential as his Sword Saint iteration a few decades down the line. Now, compare that to Harkin, and while he's no Raven, I think Harkin is actually a very high tier character. I would argue that he's low A tier. Harkin comes in with great stats, he comes in with very solid growths and good weapon skill level, and with being a hero, the ability to use swords and axes, having access to brave weapons, just being able to fill a lot of different niches for you, and joining at a point where you don't need to worry too much about how much growth he's going to get over the rest of the game. He is a way stronger character than you would expect. I remember when I first played the game, I had very much adapted to this idea that pre-promotes were just universally terrible unless they were like your Jaken character, right? So I didn't use it. But then there was one run that I did where I decided I wanted to use pretty much all different characters than I had used in my previous run, and that meant that I had some gaps in my arsenal once I finally got around to recruiting Harkin. Like, I didn't use Raven because I'd used Raven previously. It was like, well, I love heroes, they're one of my favorite classes in the game at that point. We'll start using Harkin. That boy, He slayed out. It was insane. He was phenomenal for me from the time I recruited him to the time we slayed the fire dragon. He was just awesome. I will always have a newfound respect for him and other character archetypes like him who are pre-promotes but still kick a lot of ass. Now, though, we need to talk about Nino. And I'm not going to be as down on Nino as a lot of people are, because I do like the Est archetype as a style of play. And the thing that Nino has going for her is the fact that she is a mage. Unlike a character like an actual Est, who has to largely be on the front lines in melee and dealing with all the trials and tribulations and dangers that come along with that, Nino can actually sit behind your frontliners, your tanks, and pick away at stuff to gain levels and actually make use of the insane growths that she has available to her. You do still need to go through a lot of levels in a relatively short amount of time to make her worthwhile, but it's much less frustrating to do that than it is other characters of her archetype. And I think this is part of the reason that in FE8, the recruits all have early access to ranged attacks, so you can actually try and get some levels on them and start making them useful in a much more manageable way, to say nothing of the early recruitment time that they have compared to Nino. So Nino is definitely a frustrating use case. I'm going to say that she's solidly better than characters like Rebecca or Isadora, just because she does have that ability to grow very well and very quickly and deal at least chip damage in the process. And then she does absolutely hit that point where she suddenly just pops off and is completely indomitable. I'm not going to say that she's better than a character like Pent in general use case, which is one of the things we're kind of looking at here with this tier list, but she's definitely better than people give her credit for. And I think Est archetypes in general are better than people give them credit for, unless you're judging things based solely on an LTC run, and again, I don't do that here. So, Jafar. Jafar is, I think, above Legault, maybe probably not above Guy in B tier. If you just want a character to be able to use lockpicks and also occasionally kill stuff without having to go through the rigmarole of getting a specific recruitment item or having to level a thief or anything like that, Jafar is absolutely going to be a very strong option for you. He's got damage, evasion, health, dex, everything that you could possibly want to make him particularly adept at his role, and having access to lethality, having all the utility of a thief type character makes him a very strong pick. Especially if you wind up actually using a character like Nino, where you can get very specific support conversations for him. He is quite strong, and you could do much worse than using him. Now, I have to remember the name because I always want to say Vriska, and it's not Vriska, it's Vida. We're down to our last few recruits here. Vida. Vida's very middle of the road. She recruits so late. And, like, yeah, she comes in as a Wyvern Lord, so you have that utility. She has the rescue option. She has good weapon skill overall. But she doesn't have the best stats. She doesn't have the best growths. You can, through trickery, get her very fancy stat-boosting spear. That's not really a boon to her. Even that's a boon for anyone that can use spears. She's just not super great. However, she is a Wyvern Lord. She can survive long enough to handle some fighting. I think she's going to go low B tier above Luis because, again, she just has that utility of being a flyer with solid physical stats who can rescue characters, chip things apart, do special objectives, etc. She's never your first pick before, like, any other character who's going to scale really well into being an absolute slaying machine, but there are also definitely worse characters that can fulfill a similar role for her. Next up, we have Carla. Yes, Carla. God, for some reason, her and Vida, yes. I have such a hard time remembering their names for it. I don't know why. Carla is very solidly a D tier character, and our only other D tier character they're going to have on the list today. Carla is just sad. She has such a weirdly specific recruitment requirement, and compared to any other Myrmidon in the game, she's just weak. Like, she's a fur archetype, right? Like, she has that low strength but very high speed and high crit. But any other Swordmaster style character in the game is going to have just as good crit for the most part, while also having the strength to actually deal damage with it and not being super frail as well. Carla's just not good. Her ability to fight and protect herself is really the only thing that puts her above Marilynus. But of all the characters in the game that I actively dread having to use, Carla is at the top of the list. And it's a very short list of one. Now, finally, though, we have to talk about our two endgame casters, Renal and Athos. Renal's a weird situation where, again, he's just like a staff user, and because he comes in like fully leveled and ready to go, he's kind of better than our other staff users in a lot of ways. Like, they give you this character just so you have someone who you know you can trust to be able to use all those fancy staves that you've been collecting over the course of the game in the final stage of the game when you finally decided it is not only needed but appropriate for you to use them. That's his role. That's it. That said, that is a very strong role, and while his light magic is just okay, just having that capability with staves makes him very strong, especially because you don't need to level him at all to get him to that point compared to other equivalent characters. Finally, we have Athos, and Athos by default is an S tier character, just below Ninian and Nils, because they are again able to refresh anyone in the game and give them buffs. But Athos is just stupidly overpowered. He's the character that they give you to be like, okay, even if you're the worst player of all time, and you got half of your party killed, if not more, and the characters that you have aren't well leveled, or just got really god-awful stat growths alongside your terrible gameplay, here's a character who, with a little bit of experimentation, should be able to kill the final boss for you. Okay, cool. Obviously, that means he's extremely strong. You have him for one level. He's one of the legendary heroes. He's got basically maxed out stats in every category that matters for him. He's absolutely disgusting. He's the Thunder God Cid of this game, and while he doesn't have much of a bearing on it, it would be foolish to say that he's anything other than S tier. And that, my friends, is my Fire Emblem 7 character tier list. I don't really think that I have anything I want to switch around here. I've been thinking about it as I've been moving characters around to the different tiers, and I think they're pretty much all in spots where I'm happy with them, honestly. You know, I've had a lot of time over the years to think about FE7, to kind of refine my perspective on these characters, and while I haven't finished my current run yet, that I just started a couple of days ago, I've played enough of it to refresh me on most of these characters, and as such, I feel very confident about my stances on them even to this day. I'm sure that y'all are going to have some opinions, everyone always does on these tier list videos, and on their own, that's totally fine. All that I ask is that you be kind and respectful and polite, and maybe just a little bit chill when you're talking to me or each other, lest I decide that I need to clap back on you, because every once in a while, somebody does something to deserve it. That said, though, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Jokes aside, I do want to hear all of your thoughts on these characters and this tier list in the comments down below. Give me your perspectives. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.